Let's get started. It's 2:30. First of all, thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to see so many of you here for such an important topic. My name's Ashwin Kumar. I'm Director of Research and Policy at the IPPR. Welcome. And also, this event is being hosted jointly with the National Education Union. So thank you, Daniel, for joining us in organising this event. We're going to start off with some comments from our speakers. Sarah Smith, MP, will be joining us very shortly. She's, I understand, less than 5 minutes away, so she'll be joining us very shortly. But I'll just briefly introduce everybody and then we'll kick off. So first of all, Daniel is General Secretary of the National Education Union. And then on my left is Kieran, who is Chief Executive of The Difference. And I'm sure you'll explain what the difference is when you start speaking. And then beside Kieran is Farzana. Farzana is a youth steering group member of the Fair Education Alliance. And then finally, we have our own Effia, who is a research fellow at the Institute of Public Policy Research. So I will, without further ado, I'll ask you to speak for 5 minutes. And then we'll try and take as many of your questions as possible within the time. I did see something on Twitter saying that chairs should limit questions to no more than 8 words. I won't be that harsh, but please keep them to questions, not long essays. Okay, Daniel, do you want to kick off?
Well, thank you very much. It's really good to be with you for this afternoon. There's much that we can welcome from an incoming Labour government. Firstly, we have a Secretary of State that's wanting to meaningfully reset the relationship with the profession, which is encouraging. But this government must tackle 3 key things when it comes to education. Firstly, the crisis in school funding. Over the last decade, we have seen school funding be completely eroded. 70% of schools now have less money in real terms than 2010. So there's an issue with per pupil funding. There is, of course, the SEND crisis, in which we have a £5 billion black hole currently for the pupils who are most in need, and that is something that parents are feeling very pronounced way. And of course, the crisis in the school estate. We are still in the midst of a RAP crisis. Well, coming out of it, but we still very much have a school estate not fit for the 21st century. The second thing that the incoming government needs to deal with is also the crisis of recruitment and retention. Over the last decade, we've seen the pay of school staff also eroded. We've seen workloads rocket, and graduates are now entering a profession, entering economy, where there is greater flexibility. That needs to be recognised, that the teaching is not a job that you can do 3 days a week from home, and needs to be compensated appropriately. And we welcome the fact that the government want to recruit 6,500 new teachers. However, this is in the context of a record low birth rate, where 35,000 fewer teachers are expected to be needed to maintain current pupil teacher ratios over the next decade. So Labour's commitment isn't really 6,500 more, it's just 28,500 fewer, really. So it's devil's in the detail with that one. We absolutely have to be arguing and articulating, actually, that class sizes of 20 are a good thing. It brings us down to a European average, and that we should, recruit enough teachers to accordingly. Also, the third thing that this government needs to really confront when it comes to education is a crisis in child poverty. 4.3 million children living in poverty, 9 to 10 in their class of 30, and we all have seen that grow exponentially over the past decade. About a fifth of schools currently also operate a food bank. That's a shameful state of affairs in the fifth richest economy. And of course, child poverty leads to an entire wastage of human creativity. We lose doctors, we lose nurses, we lose all of those who can build this future society that we absolutely want to see. But this government also does need to be radical on the things that don't cost money. Curriculum and assessment review is up and running. We have the second most unhappiest 15-year-olds in the OECD. We have an attendance crisis, which really should be viewed as a crisis in engagement in education. We lead the world for rote learning. We've seen the curriculum narrowed to such an extent that arts and creative drama, music, creative subjects that make the school day bearable now just really preserves for those who can afford to go to the independent sector. So we do absolutely need to see that sort of bold vision from the government moving forward in terms of its priorities. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniel. And we're very pleased to be joined by Sarah Smith, MP for Hindburn. Sarah, would you like to give us a few words, up to 5 minutes?
Yeah, absolutely. Great to see such a packed room. Firstly, I guess a few words about how I've come to be here today. And that is that I spent like the last kind of 17 years working generally for the charity sector with organisations that are trying to support young people that are growing up in the disadvantaged backgrounds and families in order that they can have the best chances. And the reason I first got involved in politics was because I was volunteering in a youth club, and I had that moment of realisation. I was in my early 20s when I was obviously like mentoring, working with these young people, and I recognised that like I'd had the fortunate experience of like a family that supported me and a decent state education, and I had all these doors opened and I could see a bright future ahead of me. And the young people I was supporting, like they were just as smart as me, probably smarter, but they weren't going to have the same opportunities because of the postcode in which they'd been born and the way that the education system had failed them, and that they were there stood in front of me when they were sort of 16, 17, 18 years old, looking at quite a bleak future. And I got really angry about it. And it was the time coalition government had just come in and they were starting to take things away from children and young people. EMA being one of the ones that, you know, we'll all nod our heads and remember, but there were many, many others, Sure Start, you name it. And so, yeah, transform, you know, fast forward those 17 or so years. And then, you know, for me, that's always been the driving force behind why I got involved in the Labour Party and why I'm so passionate about the opportunity mission to break down the barriers of opportunity so that every child and young person in this country has the same chance. A child growing up in my constituency in Clayton should have exactly the same life opportunities as a child growing up in Chelsea. We know the data tells us that currently it's very, very different. So I'm really, as you can tell, like passionate about the role I've now got as the national mission champion for the opportunity mission, and particularly because, you know, I will get to work closely with the ministers on the opportunity mission to make sure that everything that we do is absolutely about making sure that those that are starting from the lower starting point are the ones that we prioritise and make sure that those, you know, we really are making a difference on the not just child poverty in terms of the economic poverty side of things, but the wider scope of like what we know poverty really means. So, you know, we know the awful statistics. We know some of the big challenges that we've got to face into. So be it a number of young people, obviously, that are being badly let down, who have some form of SEND, and the total catastrophic failure of that part of the system that we see then impacting not just on those children and families, and the painful fights that I hear too often on the doorstep from my parents of how the system has stopped them from being able to get the best for their children. But also that then also impacts obviously on those that don't have SEND actually in the classroom, because we see the impact it has on our teachers in our schools and how it then actually is a greater barrier to opportunity for other young people, because we know as well, if you're in poverty, you know, you're more likely to have SEND and poverty often go hand in hand. And so it's those schools working in the toughest situations that end up double burdened by the challenges. And we were talking yesterday in a panel on recruitment and retention of teachers. And that was, you know, I was really making the point that, yes, you know, it is a national problem at one extent, but actually when we start to use the data and look at how it impacts regionally and locally, like I've been working obviously both in my constituency and in Blackpool, and like the challenges there are so much more acute. And so our policy and our focus needs to make sure that we address those regional inequalities. And that is, you know, why I'm really, the other issues that I think are really, really key and are coming forward now in the legislation that we're proposing, how we tackle mental health in our schools, and committing to making sure that every school has that mental health counsellor, and I've seen that be effective. And also the focus on careers and making sure that we actually deliver really high quality careers education. and tackling the attendance issue, which we know is a systemic issue. If we have more joy in our classrooms, if we take seriously the commission and the work that's going on the curriculum, if we have more joy in our classrooms, we'll have children wanting to turn up. If we deliver as we are going to on breakfast clubs in every school, we know if children come in for breakfast, they're more likely to stay for the rest of the day. All of these like different strategies, if you like, are about tackling some of these systemic issues. I will stop there because I could just talk for a long time and I realise I've got to hear from everybody else, but there's a few thoughts, I guess, starting us off, and I no doubt have questions that will cover off some of the other things that I've got here.
Yeah, happy to. Hi everyone, can you hear me at the back? Maybe not. Can you hear me at the back? Great. So I am, my name is Kieran Gill. I'm an English teacher and drama teacher by training. So I hope that you are going to hear me at the back, and you're going to hear quite a few rules of three. As I consider this question, I'm also a former IPPR member. I'm an associate fellow, and I've just written a report called Who's Losing Learning? So go out and read it. But the title of this session is what are Labour's priorities for schools? And I've taken that to be what should Labour's priorities for schools be? And I think they should be the missions. So yes, schools as an engine to unlock opportunity, but actually also schools as an engine for growth. I think that's really important. And schools as front line in a public health approach. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those three. There is some bad news, or in fact, three parts to my bad news. So sorry about that. The first bad news is that more children than ever before are losing learning in England today, and that is a real threat to education and schools as an engine for growth in our country. So, two examples: we have 32 million days of learning lost last year to suspension and absence from school. Now that's the equivalent to every child in Liverpool not attending school every day for 2 years. Those are children not learning in our schools last year. But it's not just children we can see in the published data sets who are not at school through absence and suspension. Also, we know that internal truancy is a growing challenge for teachers and school leaders. 95% of secondary school teachers tell us it's a growing challenge, internal truancy, children turning up at school but not being in lessons. And increasingly, they are more worried about that than they are about official attendance. So we've got a real challenge. This is the second piece of bad news. We cannot shatter the class ceiling in England through schools, because this lost learning is disproportionately affecting our poorest children in the country. I'll give you a couple of examples here. So what do we mean when we say free school meals or living in poverty? We're talking about an annual household income of less than £7,500. And those children make up a quarter of our school population at the moment. But they make up half the children who were suspended last year, who are not coming into school. And we know that they're twice as likely to be standing outside the door because they've got the highest behaviour tariff in the school, and they're 5 times more likely to be permanently excluded. So in our new piece of research with IPPR and our colleagues, Mission 44 and Impetus, the difference has been opening the lid on who's losing learning and asking what is driving it. And the answer is mental ill health. So mental ill health is interacting with a lot of experiences for children at the moment, whether that is living in extreme poverty and the challenges that come with that, domestic violence and challenges with addiction, which can overlap with poverty, experiences of racism, being neurodiverse, and how difficult that is to turn up in school if there aren't adjustments made for young people who have special educational needs, and speech language communication needs. I could go on. I really believe that we need to evolve schools to be a frontline service in mental health. And the good news is that I think there's actually quite a lot we can do, which doesn't include new spend in order to do that. It includes unlocking the potential of the brilliant adults who are already in schools and their relationships with children. But I have my third piece of bad news, which is there is not a lot of money, which we know. And one of the challenges for us in schools around spending money is that at the moment we're spending such a lot at the acute end of need. So as more and more children are losing learning and falling out of our mainstream schools, they're designated beyond the capacity of what a typical mainstream school can do. So we have more and more spend coming out of the high needs budget into special needs schools and into the special and AP sector. And half of local authorities are telling us that they are going to exceed their high needs budget and potentially going to be bankrupt by 2025. And when we look at the breakdown of that spend, we know that again, the poorest children are not getting the most out of our services. So too often, public money is going into private hands in private special educational needs schools who charge 3 times what a pupil referral unit pays. Children who are disproportionately living in poverty act as pupil referral units costs. So this is pretty depressing, these 3 challenges. How are we going to change this challenge? How are we going to change the problem on lost learning? The very good news is, I'm very proud that teachers up and down the country are walking towards this problem, as are their school leaders, as are their local authorities, and parents often, and they're getting really innovative. So the difference is part of the Who's Losing Learning coalition, and we are creating policy for the sector, by the sector, to answer some of these problems. I can see council members in the room who are doing just that. We're looking together at 3 drivers and how we can have solutions in 3 areas. First is evolving the purpose of schools, and Labour needs to do this, to say that schools need to measure what matters, and that's not just the academic success of students. We know children can't learn if they're not safe and they're not well, and we need to put that measure at the heart of schools' work, student experience, which underpins success. And I imagine we might hear other panelists saying similar things. And we've got the curriculum review as a good opportunity here, and the school report card, but more needs to be done, I think, by Labour to measure student experience, put that at the heart of schools' work. Second, workforce. We need to invest in the development of relational practice. The Youth Endowment Fund of others have shown that trusted adult relationships are really key. I can see Football Beyond Borders here, they know it to be true. Really key in changing outcomes for the most vulnerable learners, but for all learners. And we need the same focus in developing adults' ability to have those brilliant relationships and repair them when they break. Just as we spent the last decade supporting and training teachers to deliver curriculum content, we need the same focus in this area of relational practice. And then the third priority that I have for Labour for schools is to reimagine the relationship between schools and families. The attendance crisis and post-COVID tells us that relationships have terribly broken down in some instances between the communities that schools serve and those institutions. We need to rebuild schools' confidence and parents' confidence in schools as a hub of services for families. And to allow them to work in partnership with schools, particularly in how to work with their children as they're adolescents. And going through the brain development, that second sort of neuroplastic phase of adolescence. And I think Labour is talking well about early years, saying some great things about primary and extended school days, but not enough about secondary, when our children transition into the workforce. So if schools will be an engine for growth in our economy, we need to focus there on making sure that fewer of them are losing learning and they're staying in school and achieving. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe.
Definitely. So one of the reasons why we decided to establish a programme on schools at IPPR was because we could see that there wasn't enough attention being paid to schools. There's this kind of general view that schools are sort of in a better place compared to where early years and post-16 sort of opportunities have been. And while that may not, entirely be wrong, I think that viewpoint has essentially led to a fairly kind of vague plan on what, should actually change within schools. So I think what the government needs to be doing, and it's what I hope some of the work across the Opportunity Mission will be doing, is actually looking at the child's life in the round. So sort of from pre-early years right up to when they're an adult. And part of this challenge is understanding a child's life within and beyond the school gates, and understand how this interacts with a young person's ability to get the most out of their education. So firstly, if we're just to start by looking sort of beyond the school gates, that sort of means that there needs to be an early years and childcare offer that's accessible, affordable for every single family. And that childcare has to be of high quality so you can identify additional needs. Secondly, we need to think about how we can better support the most vulnerable students and recognise that not every child will have the same experience in school. So some of the things IPPR have called for in the past are things like universal free school meals across all primary schools, pre and post extracurricular activities, and then also mentorship offers for young people who are struggling to stay engaged with their education. And then on rising child poverty and mental health challenges, I'm really keen to see the government roll out of mental health nurses in every school and ensure that we're taking that preventative approach to try and stop those needs from becoming so acute. But I think the government could go further and think about the co-location of social workers and youth workers in schools and the benefits of those sort of long-term relationships can actually give to young people. This idea of kind of a sort of third trusted adult can kind of really help a young person to have a sense of belonging in their school. And then I think it's important to note, which isn't always discussed enough in spaces like where we are today, which is frankly the traumatic nature of growing up in poverty, and that we could be paying a lot more attention to sort of trauma-informed approaches in schools, which in turn could begin to disrupt some of what is sometimes mischaracterization and demonization of children's behaviour. And then on the flip side of that is the kind of the work that is driven, within schools and by school leaders and MAP leaders. So firstly, there's a curriculum review and reform that is hopefully to come, and that's a very live conversation right now. And that's a great opportunity to support schools sort of engagement and kind of raise the resilience among young people. I think the work of sort of rethinking assessment is a great example of how we can sort of shift young people to view their school success as not only based on their academic achievement. And then there's of course the workforce. We find ourselves at IPPR constantly talking about workforce problems time and time again across the public sector, which often in education boils down to stress and overworking. So I think we should be looking at a more generous sort of training offer for new teachers so they have more time for their professional development and then they can shape their skills based on their interests. But I would say that everything that I've kind of said here isn't particularly new. I think the overarching sort of problem here lies that there's a fair amount of work actually already going on that's bucking some of these trends, and there's local areas and schools that are actually taking matters into their own hands and addressing some of these problems with the limited kind of resources that they have. I think the bigger policy question actually is why these examples of best practice haven't actually been scaled, and we need to interrogate what's been going on across our kind of policy architecture really that's stopping best practice from being implemented at scale. And then just finally, I think we should be talking more about youth voice as well. I'd like to see more young people sort of involved in local democracy and being consulted on the decisions that are actually made over their lives. And just on that note, I actually want to really just say how happy I am that we welcomed Fazana here today and acknowledge the fact that many of us here today are working across the education sector and will be attending lots and lots of events or schools and education, but it's very unlikely that we'll actually see young people involved in those conversations. So when we ask this question of what do students or families or parents actually want, then we need to, and I'm talking to myself as well as a think tanker and a policy maker as well, is that we need to be asking those questions directly and reflecting the ideas that we have with those who are actually experiencing the education system in real time.
Thank you. Would you like to give us a little?
Hi everyone, my name is Fazana Begum and I'm a member of the Fair Education Alliance Youth Steering Group. So for those of you that don't know, the Fair Education Alliance is a coalition of 300 cross-sector organisations all working together to reduce the inequalities in education. The Youth Steering Group brings young people's valuable first-hand experience into conversations about these inequalities and into conversations and decisions that impact us. So I strongly believe that government should prioritise young people's voices, which are representative of diverse lived experiences. So a little bit about myself. I'm from a little borough called Oldham in Greater Manchester. I'm the eldest daughter to immigrant parents and a young carer for my mum and dad who have significant health issues. Neither of my mum and dad have experienced formal education, so I feel very privileged to have had the opportunities that I've had throughout my educational journey. So in primary school, when I first grasped a good understanding of English, I started to translate legal documents, important documents, letters. I started interpreting at doctor's appointments. The best that I could do, even interpreting at my own parents' evening, the best that you can do at 7 years old. So that was around the age I realized in my household, I was considered privileged. I was considered educated to my family because I received the education and I picked up English skills and I'd achieved this better life that my mum and dad wanted for me. But outside of my house and outside of my community, my more privileged counterparts were the ones receiving support from their parents instead of supporting their parents. For example, with their homework, or some people were even receiving private tuition, something that I never had. They were receiving a better quality of education, which set them up to achieve the best possible grades. They didn't have to worry about making a decision between paying bills and purchasing a school uniform, purchasing PE kits, or paying for school trips. So being on free school meals, I didn't have to pay for my school meal, but being a young carer meant that every day after school, I wouldn't go home to go do my homework. I'd go home to look after my mum and dad, making sure they're taking their correct medication in the correct time. I was looking after my siblings, making sure that they were okay. So the primary school that I attended wasn't just my place of education, it was a community for me. It was truly a supportive environment. The teachers that I had, I will forever be indebted to them for their support. They were aware of the challenges that my family were facing with my parents' health conditions, my parents being from immigrant backgrounds, myself and my siblings' additional needs. So they would make regular home visits. They would check up on myself, my siblings, my mum, my dad. They would work closely with learning specialists, our health practitioners, support workers, making sure not just myself, but my siblings were okay, my mum and dad were okay. So that's what I remember about my primary school teachers, the teachers that went above and beyond. Secondary school, however, was a different story. My teachers were too stressed to recognise the challenges I was facing silently. As I got older, I started to understand that coming from a low-income family and being a carer, being first generation, I had to work considerably harder than my peers to achieve my goals. So everyone I knew in my community, they were from a similar background to me, facing similar challenges, but I knew that I wanted a better life for myself and for my younger siblings. I decided that it was up to me to embody that representation that I wished that I could see and that I wish I had growing up. So I decided to be a role model for my siblings and achieve great things. I went on to be the first person in my family to go to university. And this summer, I was selected out of hundreds of applicants to spend 7 weeks at the University of Oxford as part of a cohort on a research internship. It was an unforgettable experience. I had never imagined setting foot in such a prestigious university, as you can imagine, never mind carrying out research. As you can imagine, though, unfortunately, I didn't see many faces like mine studying at the University of Oxford. I didn't see many people who had experienced similar socioeconomic barriers that I had overcome. So back at home in my community, I was constantly told by family and members of the community that I was very lucky to have achieved the accomplishments that I'd achieved in undertaking this internship. But I don't want to be that, I don't want to be considered lucky, and I don't want people to confuse hard work for luck. When they see young people like me achieving great things, I don't want it to be down to luck. I don't want to be an exception in this flawed education system that hinders young people like myself. I want opportunities like this to be more accessible for young people from similar backgrounds to me, so that they too can achieve their potential and see themselves in prestigious academic institutions or whatever form of success that they choose to go on to achieve. So my name is Fazana Begum, and I'm an advocate for Youth Voice. I'm passionate about social mobility and empowering all young people to achieve their potential. I am an advocate, and my priority is to build a better, fairer education for all young people. So today I am bringing my voice to advocate for my generation, to represent a demographic that aren't usually involved in policy making, aren't given a voice in decision making roles, because we are the future generation, we are the future. So this is one of my asks, this is one of our asks as part of the Fair Education Alliance for government. But you can read about our 4 main priorities, which we've developed with our 300 member organisations, which are a strong workforce, a system that enables every young person to thrive, the best early years education, and a joined up system. You can read more about these in our Fair Education Alliance priorities for new government. Thank you so much.
That was a fantastic set of comments and thoughts from the panel. I'm now going to turn over to you. They've been very disciplined in keeping to time. So there's plenty of time for questions. Just remind you about my comments about, I might have to impose an 8-word limit if we get lots of speeches. So who would like to kick off first with a question? It's a lady here. We do have a mic, so if you just hold on a second, Ellie will bring it to you.
Hi, my name is Anya Sizer. I'm a local councillor in Hackney. Amazing and especially amazing. I'm the special needs champion for the borough of Hackney, but I'm also here today as a mum of a child with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. FASD is more prevalent than autism and yet is so often overlooked in our education system. Please can the panel ensure that something is being done about this, and please can anyone tell me if anything is being done about this? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll take questions in groups. So that was a question about right. So who would like to go next? Got the lady over here.
Thank you, and again, such an excellent panel at this conversation. That was amazing. My name is Lorraine Kelly, and I am the head of policy and public affairs at Magic Breakfast. We're a charity that ensures no child in the UK is too hungry to learn. Very, very on topic here. We know that breakfasts have been proven to improve attainment, mental health and well-being in children, and academic outcomes. The current Labour government have committed to rolling out breakfasts across all primary schools in England, which we massively support and think it's a brilliant policy. Do you see this as part of the solution to ending child morning hunger and ensuring all children have equal access to education? And secondly, do you believe on the panel that this should be rolled out beyond just primary schools to all children in special schools and with special educational needs and disabilities?
Okay, thank you. And then the third one is one right here in the middle.
I would like to ask about music in schools, because music has gradually been diminished over the last few years. And it's very difficult for any child who might like to learn an instrument to do so if they're not very well off. So how can we remedy this? Because music is such an important thing. I mean, probably everybody in this room has come to love music in some way or other. And it makes such a difference, to one's well-being, to one's enjoyment, to other people's enjoyment. And it'd be great if we could do something about music in schools. What we can.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've got 3 questions. One on fetal alcohol syndrome. We've got one on breakfast clubs, and particularly the expansion of breakfast clubs. And then we've got the third one about music teaching in schools. Sarah, do you want to kick off?
I think firstly to say, is it Ellie? Yeah, that Annie, that obviously like the whole kind of send agenda, there's a lot of work to be done and we're only at the starting blocks. I think it's a valid point that you raise, and I'm happy, send me some, you know what I mean? Like, I think you're right to raise it. And so I think we've got to make sure that we get away from, and I think so I've worked on the specific in the panel over the years. You speak to young people, they often use phrases that sort of mean something like, square peg and round hole type thing. And that's sort of like where I think we need to get the education system is they actually meet the needs of every individual child. Now, that's possibly a bit utopian dream right now, but we should make strides towards that. So take that forward. And on the breakfast, I think that first of all, we have to make sure, and we had a bit of a chat about this yesterday, that, that breakfast provision reaches those that need it the most. We are working in very, very tough financial circumstances, as we all well know, and we will keep saying that because unfortunately it's true. And I think it goes back to what I did say, which is, yes, we need to make sure that we target the money that we do spend at those that need it the most. And obviously, if you have the chance to roll things out, we know our send population are in that category. So, I mean, yes, again, it would be one of those that, yes, to support it, but we've got to be realistic in terms of taking each step as it comes. And then, you know, I think this is why the music question is why it's so important. One of the first things that we have done is we've established the review of the curriculum. You know, I always relate back to my own story. I just love drama. That's why I turned up at school, and that's why I got to the other subjects. And I think that's true for probably almost everyone in the room. And so I'm really hopeful of what's going to come back from that and how we do get a greater focus. And it's not, it works over so many levels. So you've got like what's best for the child, what's, you know, happy children equals happier teachers, equals more learning, equals better outcomes for children. And it's also an economic argument. Our creative industries are a huge bit of our economic growth opportunity. We've got a very, very strong sector in this country, and we're not finding them with the talent they need. So it also is on that line as well.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to put it to the panel. We've got 3 questions. It's alcohol syndrome, breakfast clubs, music. Don't feel you have to answer all of them. Is anyone keen to comment on any of those?
I'd like to respond to the question about the Magic Breakfast Club. I think it's an amazing initiative, and I agree. Myself personally, having received free school meals, and a lot of my peers, a lot of people in my community, I saw the difference it made. I saw how it brought young people, pupils, students to skill. And as everyone will be aware, food and nutrition is so important to mental health. Young people being able to learn, coming to school, having had breakfast allows young people to learn their stuff, and that is just a fact. I also believe, and also as part of the Fair Education Alliance, we do support universal free school meals, and I think that should extend to Magic Breakfast Club and schools like special education needs schools. I think it shouldn't be something that's stigmatized, because that's what happens when it is select students who are receiving this provision. It becomes this handout almost. It shouldn't be like that. It should be something that all young people are eligible for, all young people deserve and receive. I think you'll all agree that a healthy, nutritious meal is something that all our children, our siblings, our nieces, nephews should receive.
Thank you. I mean, who else would like to?
I'm happy to, yeah. Hi Anya, it's nice to see you. And you and I both adopted families.
Yes.
So part of what drives me is my sisters were adopted into my family when I was 11. And it's definitely the case that if I think about what group they would fall into, they don't fall into designated groups. So the Children in Need review, which was done a few years ago now, found that children who are on a child protection plan often have much worse outcomes in some areas than those who are looked after. And it's a real challenge about sort of realising categories and then realising that we've overlooked them. It's the same with young carers. So young carers, we've only really been talking about in the last few years as a group. And I think it's very positive that we're starting to recognise different experiences like fetal alcohol syndrome, like you know, the different types of special educational needs that young people have. But it's also a sort of barrier in a weird way to meeting them, because the more we atomise different groups, the more we create boundaries. You have to prove that you've crossed over the boundary, and we don't know, you know. So I haven't actually explained what the difference does. The difference supports school leaders, particularly heads, deputy heads and assistant heads, to create a whole school strategy to improve inclusion. And we define inclusion as meeting children's learning, well-being and safeguarding needs. And I would really make a push for that to be a definition of inclusion, because it's actually not about whether you're in a group and we know it or we don't know it. It's about whether your needs showing up at school as a barrier to you being able to access learning, or as a challenge for you in your life and your mental health, and framing it more around trying to get that understanding. And I don't think it's utopian actually, as a teacher, to get to better know our students individually in order to understand their needs. I'll give a quick anecdote of a school that I've worked with in the last few years who has done exactly that. It's a big, busy secondary school. in town hamlets, and they've realised that trusted adult relationships are a key way of supporting children's mental health, protecting them from harm, and understanding more about their needs as individuals. And they've done a really radical thing. So lots of you who might interact with secondary schools might know that if your children do form time, they register with their form tutor. There's probably 30 of them in a room. I was a form tutor, classic. What they've done is they've said, look, every adult in our school could have a child or a group of children, and if we did that, we'll change ratios. So it's a big secondary school, they've got 1 to 8, and that's their form time. And those young people's needs are better known. So, you know, I do think there are things we can do to think outside the box that aren't about more money, they're about using the brilliant resources and the committed professionals we've already got in the building. And yeah, I think that's part of the answer in terms of improving strategic whole school inclusion.
Got Daniel then, if you, Daniel?
I thought Fazana's contribution around preschool meals was absolutely superb. I don't know what this government's issue with universalism is. I think you know, completely removing the stigma from preschool meals by making them universal would be a positive thing. In primary school, you're just really asking for key stage 2 to be rolled into. It's already happening in London. It's happening in Wales. It seems like it's just a no-brainer. And it's something we should absolutely see. I wanted to pick up on your point about music. How do we get more music on the curriculum? And the creative subjects are so vitally important, and it's, you know, the curriculum and assessment review is really welcome. But we also
help tremendously with the academic subjects.
Without a doubt, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the problem is we've had 14 years. We've had 14 years of a government that only wants to measure everything in schools, and because some of those subjects are much more difficult to measure, they've not been prioritised. Actually, what you do have to do as well is not just have a human assessment review, but we're going to have to change how schools are measured, what they're measured by, because if you make it all off, you're going to be measured on EBAC or, you know, English, maths, and so on, some core subjects, the curriculum just narrows, because that's what schools are held accountable to. That's what a head teacher's job depends on. You know, we have to look at this in the entire whole. You know, Ofsted reform needs to go well beyond just getting rid of the single word judgment. But you know, we need a system of accountability that really essentially creates a shared responsibility for education between us.
Yeah, no, just briefly, I mean, I would echo everything that Kieran said on said, and I think it's so unacceptable that we have such a high threshold for provision, and I think the government should be looking more at some kind of multi-tiered system as well. And then on breakfast clubs, I mean, I think obviously they're a great start. I think it doesn't obviously resolve sort of child poverty, and I'm keen to, I guess, avoid sort of kind of sticking plaster type policies. So, but I think generally kind of public health approaches in education, I think, is sort of key to sort of kind of learning and engagement. I think I would welcome kind of the expansion of that in other schools, but I think there needs to be more attention paid to come some of the causes of child poverty and why children are turning up sort of hungry in the first place. And then finally on the music and creative subjects, I totally agree with Daniel. I think also not only does it kind of enhance engagement with young people and their enjoyment of school when they're students, but also later in life. So there was some recent polling that actually showed that lots of young people don't actually want to kind of join the workforce, education, become teachers later in life due to their kind of recent memory of education just not being enjoyable and fulfilling for them. So it's not just about kind of that engagement right now with those creative subjects, but also the likelihood to kind of return in later life.
Okay, thank you, Daphne. Right, we've got some more questions. So, Doctors, over there on the floor.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Alice Stott. I'm from an organisation called Voice 21. I couldn't help but notice that undercutting almost all of the speakers was a kind of theme of student voice. So whether that's in relationship building, student engagement, young people's voices, mental health, teachers' enjoyment and connection to the people in the room that they teach. And so I was wondering if you could say a little bit about how you see oracy as part of the kind of potential solution to your kind of ambitions for education. How does enabling young people to use their voices in school, the role of talk in classrooms, help build the education system we want to build?
Okay, thanks. Ellie, if you could go to back, there's a lady at the back.
Thank you very much to all speakers. I was the first person in my family to go to university. And I was also a head teacher in a school just down the road there. So, but my question is very specific. We're talking here about poverty and inequality. The greatest crisis that is facing this generation and all of us is the climate and the nature emergency, and it is a socio-economic crisis across the world. Poor people in this country, poor people abroad will suffer most. So 8 words. How will the Labour government ensure a carbon literate generation? Thank you.
And then gentleman at the back, just behind you, Elaine.
So my name is George Carr from the Speech and Language UK, and someone from Voice 21 just asked the question very similar to what I would in the past. So I'll give myself someone else.
Okay, that's very generous. There's a lady in the middle here. That's it. Yeah.
Thank you, that's really very nice. Thank you. So I'm Alison Woodhead from Adoption UK. My question is, how do we change the narrative on attendance, which has been so insulting to so many young people and their families, and particularly those with special educational needs?
Thank you. So we've got 3 questions, one on oracy, one on climate and carbon literacy, and one about the narrative on attendance. Sarah, do you want to go first?
So I'm a big fan of the work of Voice 21, and you've done some work up in Blackpool where I've been for the last few years. And so, I mean, firstly to congratulate on the excellent work there. We have made the commitment obviously around funding more early language interventions in primary schools, and helping young people to find their voice. And I think that's the starting point of like youth voice more broadly, which is something that again, I think is so important. On the narrative on attendance, hopefully I sort of touched a bit more upon that. We are now thinking about this in a much more, I keep using the phrase like in a more systemic way, which is kind of a bit boring to say, but it's important, isn't it? That if we're going to tackle attendance, we need to inspire people to want to come in the morning. And that is through things like the breakfast clubs, hopefully, but recognizing that for the kids that find it hardest to get in for lots of different reasons, if you only make breakfast club about breakfast time, you'll stop them actually benefiting from the thing they need the most. So we've got to think about really deeply in the detail of all these things, how they get rolled out, about making the curriculum more inclusive and more enjoyable, so that again, once they're in, they're actually enjoying being in school. But it's also about tackling the family's mental health, because often I've certainly heard is that the reason children are not coming in isn't even their own mental health, it's their parents' mental health, their parents still needing them at home. So we need to get into some of these like complex issues. But I think we've also just got to be honest, this is all so difficult, isn't it? Because we also, I literally yesterday had a teacher coming up to me and reminding me as well that the point that was made earlier around sort of rebuilding the relationship between schools and some parts of their community, like we also know that teachers are getting at the end of horrible abuse and challenge and wasting a lot of time on unfounded things from parents as well. And like, again, I don't really yet have the answer. I'm really interested if other people have seen what can work in that space, because whilst we need to be absolutely kind of empathetic to the needs of our children, we also have to make sure that we're backing schools when parental behaviour is quite challenging. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. So we've got 3 questions. One is about the value of encouraging oracy in education. The second is how we can make our children more carbon literate and to deal with the climate emergency. And the third is how we change the narrative on attendance. Who'd like to come in?
In terms of the public speaking question, it goes hand in hand with the question about young people's voices and student voice. I think myself personally, believe it or not, I could not have done this a few years ago. I wasn't put in those spaces or given that opportunity to speak up. It was the challenges that I faced and the barriers that I overcame that made me realize, if I don't do it, then who will? If not for my community, if not for my younger siblings, and if I'm not that role model, then who will? So I definitely think it's incredibly important to include public speaking and the value of public speaking in schools. Similarly with youth voice, student leadership even. Young people are the future, and we don't see enough young people in leadership and decision-making roles, especially not in policy. And I think if it's decisions impacting young people, impacting people like myself, then it's incredibly important to give us that voice and have that representation in those decision-making roles and settings. If young people don't see ourselves being represented in these environments, then how can we ever feel confident enough to speak up? How can we ever feel that we have a voice? We're encouraged to speak up and to get involved, but how can we do that if we don't see it happening? Also about the narrative on attendance, this is something that's quite close to home for myself because due to my caring responsibilities, there was times when I would be attending to appointments, hospital appointments, incredibly important appointments that I could not miss because these were really, my mum and dad's hospital appointments. I wasn't going to miss that. That's not something that they could speak up about. They couldn't talk about their health issues because they didn't have the language skills. So I was there to interpret. So yes, I'd miss school because of my other commitments, because I prioritize my family and my role as a young carer. So I think it's very unfair, the policies that we have in place where families, parents, each parent is fined a considerable amount. I understand the initiative is to encourage, young people to attend school and parents to, ensure their child doesn't miss school. I understand that, but for parents and for families from low income backgrounds, it's just not, it's counterintuitive. It throws low income families into more debt or more challenges. So they might have missed school due to things like period poverty. It might be that a young girl couldn't go to school because she didn't have the resources that she needed to go to school, so she stayed home. She's already struggling, her family are already struggling financially. How does it make sense to burden that family with fines because she missed school? Similarly with young carers, how does it make any sense to punish that family because of something that wasn't in their control? So that's something that I feel quite strongly about, and I think yes, definitely we need to have a closer look at this narrative on attendance. And of course, I am a strong believer of attendance being incredibly important for young people, and it goes back to the previous set of questions about breakfast clubs, and it encourages young people to attend school. So it kind of goes hand in hand. It's like a cycle. So we need to address these root causes of poverty and deprivation and support low income families, support young carers, support these marginalized groups, give young people a voice to have a say in these decisions. That way, decision makers, leaders, politicians will have a better idea of the challenges that we're currently facing, and we can improve the education system for our future, for generations, the future generation, my generation, for young people like us.
Thank you, Fazani.
So I'd like to point to sort of two status quo ways of working, which I don't think work anymore. The first is student councils. And a typical way in which we often hear young people's voices is that maybe a form group elects who their rep's going to be, and then that rep votes on sort of inconsequential stuff in school. And that's crap. And we need to start to case study what true quality, more democratic and effective student voice work looks like in a school. I think it starts with data and then it gets qualitative. I'm going to give you an example again of a school who have been regularly surveying, they've been using survey that the different supports schools to run out in form time about students' experiences and how they feel belonging, wellbeing, safety. But then in doing that, they've noticed, wow, we've got a real challenge with, say, our Somali community who do not feel belonging in our school, or young people girls in year 8 who particularly don't feel safe. So the difference is helping break down and listening to young people's voice about specifically how do they experience misogyny in school? How do they experience racism in school, homophobia, transphobia in school? And then what do we do in our bullying policy about that? What do we do in terms of education, not just sanction, in order to deal with the root causes of what is happening in the day-to-day experience of young people? So that's one thing that's not working. I think we need to capture student experience data and qualitative data to turn it around. The second is PTAs. They're also crap. So who wants to step forward and organise some biscuits and quiz to raise money for the school, right? This is parental engagement. Well, it's not. Similarly, we need to support schools with tools for how they can take a baseline, how their parents are currently feeling belonging in the school community and engagement. Another school leader I've been working with in Bradford, who's been working with Irish traveller community and really challenging misconceptions amongst the school population, the teaching population about what the aspirations were for their children. Interesting sort of overlapping assumptions that we can make in school when we don't actually know very much about who is in the class and who's in the community. And that school went out and spoke to parents, found out a lot more about what motivated them, but also what high expectations they had for their children's success, and then change that. And I think, again, we need to allow schools to take a baseline and then go in and do qualitative to really understand how are you serving your teacher community. But and so that for me is my kind of response to attendance. But I'd say one more thing. I'd say we talk in classrooms about getting into your threat zone and the importance of de-escalation and how quickly a young person in their threat zone, you know, stressed, cortisol running through their brain, can meet a teacher or a staff member also in their threat zone, feeling quite angry, and things can escalate and just get worse. And I think the same thing has happened really for schools and for teachers. For schools and for parents, that both feel quite blamed, and we can get into a very antagonistic and very difficult context, and government has the role to play here on changing the language. They need to come out in support of parents, to back parents, and change their blaming language around attendance. And they also need to come out in support of schools. And I think particularly end the stressful feeling of competition for school places, and that education is a market and you should choose which school you're going to move your child, you're going to put them somewhere else. Like, we need to move over the longer term in the next couple of parliaments to being able to trust your local hospital and your local school, and actually not put parents in a position as sort of consumers and critics of their school, but rehabilitate that relationship, de-escalate the situation, and improve the ability for parents to feel like they're really in partnership with teachers in looking after, loving, and ensuring the success of their children. And it starts with language from government.
Okay, thanks, Karen.
On the public speaking question, I mean, we speak to employers and who kind of employ sort of recent graduates, and they often say that they feel really confident that a lot of young people leave school with all the academic kind of accolades. They don't actually feel as confident on the kind of more, I don't know, maybe softer skills isn't even the right term, but public speaking and those kind of soft skills in terms of teamwork and that kind of thing. So I think the government should actually be paying attention to what employers are actually saying, and that might be reflected in some of the work in curriculum review, but I think it can also be in some of the things on participation and liberation. I agree with you, Kieran, on student councils, but there's been great work that, for example, Ireland have done on things like co-design and actually kind of meaningful engagement of young people, and that can be from the classroom all the way into the government. But I think that takes time, and it takes a sort of kind of looking at sort of best practice as well. So yeah, that's really important.
Thanks, Sophie. So on attendance, we do have to look at it as a crisis in engagement, and the government should be asking why. I've taught from nursery to year 11. Without doubt, my favourite year to teach was nursery, because they were just had a thirst for learning that had not been beaten out of them by the time they got to year 11. I've got a 6-year-old son. It feels like I watch him go to school every September, and every year he enjoys it a little less. That's the nature of education at the moment. And why is that? It's because schools are measured and held accountable by certain metrics that will leads to a narrowing of the curriculum. So those music, arts, creativity, drama, the things that make the school day bearable for us, are becoming ever more absent for young people today. So, you know, the government do have to move away from this care and blaming narrative, big time. You know, coming out of the pandemic, anxiety's more than doubled amongst young people. There's an SEND crisis. This is not down to, you know, people going to Magaluf in the middle of June. You know, it just is not the case. Fines are completely punitive and will not work. Completely agree with Susanna. On the oracy stuff, like, children learn through dialogue. As I said, we're number one as well for rote learning at the moment, and you know, it might get them through tests, but they will not retain that knowledge for a long period of time. Schools becoming a quiet in silence. I'll teach you or listen. And that is not the experience in the independent sector. And statistically speaking, you both, a working class person who goes to Oxbridge will still not earn as much in the jobs market as a privately educated person who's gone to Oxbridge, because they have access to develop those soft skills at a younger age. Is really important.
Okay, thanks. Another round of questions.
Sorry, sir, ask a question.
Oh, sorry, climate change. We need to have
Okay, Frank, go on.
And the question I asked Will, how will the Labour government ensure that we have a carbon neutral?
So what?
I'll come very quickly. I'll come very quickly, which is I go around and speak to my children in schools, like obviously, because I absolutely love doing it. One of the favourite parts of my job, and children and young people are very clear on that being their priority. And so I don't even think it's down to government, because I think teachers are already doing the work. From my experience, I think that there's already a huge amount of progress being made around that being central. And I've seen it being done at one extreme up in Morecambe, actually. They've like taken this whole area approach to embedding this. So I would say that whilst like there is some, I would almost say that I wouldn't like to sort of jump upon what schools are already driving forward. And maybe it's more about that question of like how we're sharing that best practice. And that would be fine.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll take a couple more questions, but I'll ask people to come back if they want on the climate question. Right, who would like to ask a question? So the lady here in the red cardigan.
Hey, we talked a lot about the SEND crisis. I mean, about 2 days ago, I think the Defence Secretary was suggesting that military families might be exempted from the VAT tax on school fees. There has been a lot of talk about how SEND families should also be exempt from that tax policy. I just wanted to ask where you're at with that. You know, are military families going to be exempted? Are SEND families also going to be exempted? And what would that look like?
Okay, thank you. And then there's a lady just here.
Hi, I was also from preschool meals. I was a head teacher, and it was luck. I was lucky. Well, you know, I was on a council estate, but my family had books in the house, and I had some breaks, and that's why I was the exception on my estate. What I'd like to ask is about assessment, because we are the most assessed country in the developed world, and the GOVE curriculum, we obsess with ranking children, and I've heard it said, from the best to the worst, and we assess on a very narrow range of things. We also start assessing them at the age of 6. We then have another bash at it when they're 7, and then we then hammer them with it when they're 11, and again at 16. We don't let them leave school till they're 18, but at 11 are too many children, and I don't, you know, children who are perfect, and I've taught them who've not met a standard and who've gone on to get good GCSEs. They've been different in their development. We tell them they're not school ready, and then we expect them to engage and to be proactive and to get involved in high school. And I don't blame them when they give the school the finger when they're told they're not ready. And what are we going to do about assessment? Particularly, I know you're looking at it, but don't not something that overworks teachers, which is about measuring schools and not about children's next steps. We try to measure schools, the state of the country, and where children are at the age of 11, and it doesn't work.
Okay, thanks. And Gentleman at the end of the round, sorry, Ellie, you've got to stretch that.
We haven't dealt with the music question either yet.
So, since the ending of the supply teacher pool in local authorities, the majority agency model is the way forward for a lot of support staff. That leads to supply teachers being paid less on average, whilst also schools paying more due to the private interest in the system. What are the thoughts of the panel on how that might be addressed so we stop the hemorrhage of public sector money to private interest, a lot of which are foreign?
Okay, thank you. So we've got 3 questions. The first is exemptions for VAT on private school fees. And the second is on assessments, the level of assessment that we have and its consequences. And then the third is on the agency model for support staff. And then if anyone wants to address the climate question, you're welcome. Although our questioner has actually left, but anyway, you're still welcome. Who would like to go first? Sarah, you go first.
So I think on assessment, this goes back to, for me, actually, the purpose question. And I think that the federal education system the skills agenda and what we need in the future is not the same as what we need today. And so for people to be able to equip themselves throughout their lives, they need to have that love of learning and they need to have the skills they need to relearn things as they go through their adult lives. And right now, assessment in the way that it's done takes away that opportunity to create those lifelong learners. It puts them off learning. It goes back to the question of like, how do we return the joy to our classrooms? So I'm really like, ultimately we are putting it across to the experts to think about this through the curriculum and assessment review. There's really interesting practice going on in other parts of the world, as well as what's been going on through rethinking assessment in other organisations here. And schools are innovating and looking at, how data can be better used without us having to assess every child. We can use existing data to be able to analyse what their needs are. And to celebrate their success and not just to kind of hit them around the head when they're not achieving. So, let's be hopeful about the opportunity through the reforms that we want to bring based on what comes forward. I think yesterday I got asked this, well, are you going to change the number of teachers you need to recruit based on the changing needs of the system? And I think it's risky, isn't it? Politicians lay out, try and, they need to set out measurable objectives. And then you look at the nuance of it. I think the principle of what we're trying to do is to make sure that we are utilising money to be able to best meet the needs of all children in this country, because we know that most children are educated in the state sector and we need to have more funds available for that. And we're obviously looking at how we make sure that this announcement doesn't hit our SEND children. But equally, it goes back to the point of why can't we have a better state SEND system? Obviously, that isn't an overnight fix, but we need to be thinking about those long-term decade of renewals, that sort of reform, to make sure that we're getting the best out of the money that we are spending for every child.
Okay, thank you. So we've got 3 questions. The first on whether there should be exemptions, perhaps for military families or special education needs students for VAT on private school fees. The second is whether our approach to assessment and the volume assessment needs to be changed. And the third is whether we need to have a different way of employing support staff so that they're not using private agencies. If you'd like to come in.
I mean, I can just quickly say on that exemption question, I don't think exemption to VAT is right, regardless of who the family is. I think our 2-tier education system is archaic enough as it is. I understand that there are students with additional needs that may have got their needs met in an independent kind of setting, but that is actually the problem. It's inconsistent whether you will get your needs met or not, depending on where you are. And I think seeing that money being put into state education is the answer. Expanding that support, reforming that support entirely, and I'd like to just generally see the integration of all students regardless of their background in kind of one sort of public setting.
Thank you, Effie. If you'd like to come in,
I can, but I'd really just be echoing what Effie has said. I think I don't know enough about the school supply issue that you mentioned, but it just sort of echoes exactly this challenge that we talked about earlier about lots of finance flowing into private hands, and we need to get a grip of it and invest in our state provision, including state special schools. And I'm hopeful for the curriculum review, but I think it is also about language. You're right, it makes me so sad that Met Standard haven't Met Standard, and Labour must act to change that.
I'm huge number of children attending private schools with SEND are not funded by their parents. They are funded by.
They are by the councils.
Now, the people that are required to complain about back, they're back exempt, I think. But I certainly know that that's where the private special schools make their cash.
Okay, thank you for that suggestion. Danny, you want to
So I mean, that's correct. Local authorities spend £2 billion a year on private special educational needs places because there's not the provision within the state sector and well, because of a very pronounced SEND crisis at the moment. In fact, the whole system of it is completely inefficient. The aspiration to a more inclusive education system, I think, is a good one, but it will also take some money. Yeah, yes. On your point around assessment as well, though, you know, teachers assess all the time. What the purpose of assessment is used for needs to always be, you know, kept in the forefront of your mind. It is there to be used by teachers to inform practice. However, we have a system now of assessment where young people are being put through statutory assessments to satisfy a national accountability regime. It's highly problematic because we are telling children at a very young age that they are often failures. A third, due to rank ordering, children are not measured against a set of standards. They are measured against everyone else in their cohort. So that it's not like passing a driving test where you are measured against the rest of your cohort. That is a changeable figure, so in which there will always be a third baked in as failures. It's a completely abhorrent system, I think, actually. What a cruel way to treat young people. And on supply agency, I mean, it's just another example of public money being used falling into private hands. Big supply agencies make around £350 million of profit a year. It's obscene. And the way they make that profit is they get people into their placements, they don't pay them enough, and they charge the schools too much. I would like to see the return of local supply pools. You know, there could be other ways of doing things, cooperatives and so on. It needs.
Thank you. People come back with anything? You don't have to. No, that's fine. So what I'm going to do, we are just coming to a close. So just to invite members of the panel to say for no more than 1 minute, any final comments or reflections. Anyone wants? Sarah, you want to say anything? Yeah, Sarah has to go last. I think that's fair enough. I have gone to her first on every question. Daniel.
And so I think there's lots to be excited about this new government, but clearly so much that is required to fix schools will cost money. And we need to look at our children as an investment in the future rather than some sort of economic burden. And it's up to all of us actually to ensure that even on the things that don't cost money, the government is ambitious, because our children really do deserve better than what they've had over the last 14 years.
Yeah. Thank you. Kieran, do you want to go next?
I can do, but I'll probably just repeat myself, and it's quite similar to what Daniel just said. I think we just need Labour to not only think of schools as spend, but as an investment in our country's economic growth, and also in the ability for us to reduce spend in the NHS and reduce spend in the NHS, but make the NHS more sustainable, because actually brilliant relationships between children and adults in early years, in primary school and in adolescence are the most protective factor to long-term mental health.
Thank you.
I think a lot of the questions and concerns that we've had today have been kind of brought up by ourselves on the panel, specifically about things like the question about supply teachers. There's a reason why there's a statistic about I think it was like 30 or 40% of teachers leave the teaching force within the first 5 years. And I think there's definitely a reason for that, and that it contributes to the retention and recruitment crisis that we have within the teaching force. There's a reason why teachers are going to agencies for the flexibility and like manageable workloads and things. I think if the teaching profession is improved and where teachers are paid better, I don't think teachers would go to agencies for kind of that flexibility. And I think Just referring back to the four main priorities of the Fair Education Alliance, we need a stronger workforce, a system that enables every young person to thrive, the best early years education. We had questions about early years education and a joined up system. I think we can best support young people if we're working with the healthcare system, the police, support workers, social workers. I think we can get to know individual pupils better if we work together with different systems. That way it will address a lot of things like special educational needs, different circumstances, young carers. These circumstances will be picked up better if there's a more well-rounded system where the different sectors are working together to support our young people.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, just quickly, I think sometimes these conversations, when we talk about what the government should do on education policy, can be kind of sometimes somewhat depressing because we put it down to what the fiscal restrictions are. And I think sometimes that's a bit of an excuse because, as I mentioned before, there's lots of best practice out there where schools are making use of the resources that they already have. Of course, there's a broader argument for more school funding, but actually there's a lot of different approaches being taken with the limited resources that schools have. I'd really like government to pay a lot more attention to and embed a lot more kind of aspiration and hope back into sort of education policy overall.
I think so, yeah. And then to finish off, Sarah.
Yeah, so I think you know, the point was raised really nicely. It was quite Fasana, isn't it? So yeah. How important is that we celebrate our teachers? I don't know if, I'm assuming there are some teachers or ex-teachers in the room, but like maybe an action we can all take. So we can go back and like some teacher that we know, go and say, like, you're doing an amazing job and you're changing lives. And for too long, we've probably spoken our teachers down and we've not like celebrated how amazing they are. And I think we need to make sure that, yeah, and hopefully we're seeing that now, like Labour, we are about not just about the change that we will create, and we know there's so much change to deliver, but it's how we do it. And change is, you know, the impact of the change that we create is also dependent on how we do it. And so, you know, I've certainly had, you know, head teachers I know coming back to me and going like, Sarah, it's such a relief to see this is not going to be the same like top down, just teach more maths. Like we're in a different, we're in a different era where we start working collectively on how we tackle some of these really, really difficult like challenges. And that includes bringing young people around the table. And, you know, I was very encouraged to hear when Liz Kendall was sort of outlining some of the stuff around the Child Poverty Commission, like she was using the term co-production. And I was like, yes, you know, like we need to be serious about that. And we need to do it properly and not do it kind of tick box. And that'll be certainly sort of stuff that I'll be challenging our team on. I think beyond that as well, picking up the point that we've all got a role in this room to help make sure that we frame the argument well, which it's about investing in the long term. Obviously, politics doesn't give us often the generosity. We want to have that decade of renewal and we want to make those long-term choices, but we need to be also framing the argument through the lens of like what economic impact the investment makes. So if you're in that position of like lobbying us, make sure that you are framing the argument for us and helping us in that. And yeah, you know, I think like, you know, it's been a really, really good discussion and lots of good ideas. And I think in the end, like, you know, we recognize we wanted to make change overnight. Unfortunately, we also know that isn't possible, but making a start, we're going to keep going at it, and you know, we're going to look at this problem and stop thinking it's one solution. I'm confident about the progress that we will make in the years to come.
Okay, thank you very much. That's it for today. Thank you for an excellent discussion, really good questions, and thank you for an excellent panel. Yeah.